What the heck is a Ned Rig? A Ned Rig is this right here. It's a jig head. There's various versions of it. There's anywhere, you know, super lightweight to like 1/10 of an ounce, sometimes 1/8, sometimes 1/16. They're all generally about the same, but it just kind of depends on how deep you want to fish it, how fast you want to fall. You want it to fall faster, get the heavier weight, and there you go. So now that we know what a Ned Rig or a Ned head looks like, let's talk about the soft plastic. Usually it looks just like this. Nothing fancy, very, very simple. Sometimes you can find them with pinchers floating or a tail that flaps a little bit that are great for when you're swimming it. I've used little baby craws, this, and swam it and caught fish doing that. But generally it's just a little bitty, do very little kind of bait. I mean, you can tell it's got a little action and that's it. Most soft plastic companies make a Ned style lure. They're not hard to find. A lot of people like the Elaztec style from Z-Man, and I've actually got some craws right here that I'll probably be using today that are exactly that. You can tell these got a lot more action to them. They'll be better for swimming, but it's just a little bait. Like I said, it's not big, and that's just a part of the appeal to the fish. It just looks a little bit something. Not a lot of people throw the Ned Rig, so that's why it's advantageous for anglers like us to use it. Now that we know what the heck the Ned Rig is and what soft plastics to use, it's time to move on to the rod and reel setup. The rod and reel setup that I use is a spinning rod and reel. Typically, I like a medium heavy fast action. A moderate action is okay because it's a lighter lure and you kind of need that a little bit to help you cast. But I would not use a Baitcaster with this rig because it's gonna be frustrating for you to cast and cast and cast. I like to run a braided leader. Typically anywhere from 20 pounds is more than enough. Down to a fluoro leader, anywhere 2-3 foot, kind of depends on how clear the water is. If it's super clear, I might go 4, 5, 6 foot. And if it's fairly dingy, I might shorten it to, you know, 2, 1.5 feet. That leader needs to be really no bigger than 8 pounds. When you start getting into a little bit heavier leaders like that, it just affects the action of your cast. It makes your bait fall slower, and it just really doesn't work as well as using about 8-pound test. For the spinning reel, everybody suggests a 2,000 to 3,000 size reel. That's your typical size reel. If you go and buy a, you know, at Academy, at Bass Pro, at Walmart, wherever, typically it's gonna be 2,000 to 3,000 size. And I haven't noticed a significant enough difference between the two sizes to say, oh yeah, this one's way better and this one's way worse. They're about the same. The 3,000 is gonna be just a little bit bigger, have a little bit bigger spool. So if you wanna cast a little bit further, you'll have a little bit more there. It'll retrieve it a little bit faster. So there's a little bit of difference, but I haven't noticed enough to be like, oh, this is the only one to use. All right, so enough of yapping. Let's get to stinking fishing. All right, so we're down at the water's edge, and I'm gonna show you how to rig it, and then we're gonna fish it. It's gonna depend on the style of jig that you have. This one has some bends in it and stuff, and so I'm actually gonna Texas rig it this way. So I'm just gonna come through the middle, poke it out the top, run it through here, figure out where it needs to go through, right there. Expose it a little bit so it's weedless, right there. Now that's a weedless Ned Rig, great for fishing, obviously through the weeds and the rocks and stuff. You're less likely to get hung up this way. Some Ned Rigs, you've got to rig it on straight through and you'll have an exposed hook. In that instance, you've just kind of got to deal with it. And speaking of where to fish it, the Ned Rig is great for ponds, rivers, lakes. Generally, anywhere there's water, it's great to fish. I like fishing it along rocks, on flats, along the edge of grass lines. In the grass, it's not so great, especially when you've got that exposed hook. And I will fish it up right next to brush piles, but I'm very reluctant to throw it into brush piles unless I've got the hook covered like I do in this case, because it's prone to getting snagged. So there's several ways to fish a Ned Rig. Obviously, you're gonna cast it out and you're gonna let it sink to the bottom. This is a pretty shallow flat right here, so it doesn't take very long to sink. And I'm literally just going to drag it back to me. I want to keep that line fairly tight. and just feel every bump that it takes. And then reel in the slack, bring my rod back down, and drag it back to me. I'm literally feeling every rock. Whoa, that was a fish. Yeah, I missed it. But I'm literally feeling every rock. I'm literally feeling everything that that it hits. Cast it a little bit deeper. If you don't like dragging it with your rod, and some guys recommend not dragging it with your rod because you don't really have to set the hook hard with this lure. So you can just super slow, almost as slow as you can reel it in. We're gonna do one cast this direction. All right, so that's dragging it on the bottom. Now, typically, the reason this approach works is because when you're dragging it, you hit a rock, it hits here, and it stands up, and then it pops back over, and then it lays back down. And that little movement triggers so many bites. But this next technique is a little bit more my speed. I'm not a super slow angler, meaning I don't like to fish slow, but sometimes it calls for that. And that technique is hopping it back. Now for this technique, I like to use something that has a little bit more action. It looks like a fish swimming, or it looks like a crawfish swimming. So that's why I'm gonna switch to my Z-Man baby goat. So let's go find some deeper water to fish it in. All right, so I'm on a point that extends a little bit further out into the pond. I know it's a little bit deeper over here, so we're gonna see if swimming it is the key today. When you cast it out, you're still gonna let it sink all the way to the bottom. Once I see that it's done sinking, I'm gonna reel up tight, and then I'm gonna pull it, and then I'm gonna reel down, let it float back to me a little bit. I'm gonna reel down, pull up, and kind of reel down at the same time. This allows that bait to, as you're pulling it up, it comes up, and then it starts gliding to you, and as you reel it to you a little bit, it will swim to you more instead of just dropping straight down. So we're gonna pull up and reel to us as we reel it down, and let it sink, reel it to us. Oh my gosh. Well, we accomplished our goal today, although I was hoping he was going to be a little bit bigger, but the Ned Rig catches fish. Here, let me hold it closer to the camera so you can see it, you know? That's one thing about the Ned Rig. People say that it only catches small fish, and clearly it catches small fish, but it also catches big fish, and I know there's bigger ones in here than that. So I'm gonna keep fishing with this next technique and see if I can't entice one of them bigger fish to bite. All right, so we caught the little one. I've literally just changed to the other side of this point here. I know it's a little bit shallower, flat and everything here, but I'm hoping that there's some bigger fish around right now looking to bite. Obviously, they're interested in this color, this action. I was moving it a little bit faster when that fish bit, which brings me to that next technique, which is actually swimming it back to you. But you're not gonna crank it like a crankbait or spinnerbait. It's just kind of a slow roll back to you. So we're gonna cast it. Let it sink. Pretty sure it's really shallow right there. It looks really shallow. And then I'm just going to swim it back to me. Yep, I'm hitting the bottom here. We might have to find some deeper water. Who knows, maybe that's what they want. Moving a little faster today. So I've changed locations once again. This is a rockier bank. This is actually the pond dam. I'm gonna try fish this around it a little bit. I've noticed that there's a lot of fish hitting the top of the water. And while I would love to throw a top water right now, told you I'm only allowed to throw the Ned Rig. So instead of casting it, letting it sink, reeling it slow, I'm actually gonna reel it up a little bit higher in the water column and see if I can't trigger a bite that way. Fishing it like this is very similar to fishing like a swim bait is what I mean, that's basically what I would consider fishing the Ned Rig like this is. I've basically got a swim bait tied on at this point, not letting it sink much, although I am using a lot lighter weight than I typically would with a swim bait, but the concept remains the same. Let's cast back here over this shallow flat. So we moved further on down the pond dam into this corner. One thing that is making fishing really hard today, which is why I think the Ned Rig should be pretty much the lure that I'm using, is that it's pretty much calm. Every now and then there's a little bit of a gust, but it's like 5 miles an hour, so there's just a little tiny ripple and then it goes away. This lure is kind of like an in-between finesse technique. One thing that I'm starting to really like about it is how versatile it is, meaning that you can fish it super slow and put yourself to sleep, or you can fish it a little bit faster. And of course, that all depends on what the bass are wanting today, which is what I'm still trying to find out after that one little bitty bass bit that was barely bigger than the lure. That's a lot of bees. Well, the stinking camera decided to overheat, but I decided to keep fishing anyways while it cooled down. And turns out the Ned Rig doesn't just catch bass. Catches little channel cats too. He smacked it hard. Well, I'd say today's fishing challenge was a success. I only used the Ned Rig, caught 2 fish. While neither were giants by any standards, it's still fish on a very tough day. These conditions were not ideal for fishing. I mean, sure, it's a beautiful day, but fishing wise, calm, sunny days where like this, it just makes it really hard. But when that catfish hit, it sure felt like a big fish. They fight great. The Ned Rig is known for catching a lot of fish in wide ranges. But if you don't know what a big bass is, then I suggest checking out the video down below me, and I'll see you there.